This will be recorded and it's being shown on Westborough TV, and then for anybody that's interested and wants to go back and watch it again, you can. I'm just looking up to make sure they're good to go, and then we'll kick off. All right. So my name's Chris. I'm with the Department of Public Works. This is Lisa, our town engineer, and Jeff, our stormwater engineer. And then we have a team from Fuss and O'Neill, Laura and April. They'll be talking later this evening, and we are here tonight to talk about the Jackstraw Brook Culvert improvements. We're going to take a few minutes to present the project, or at least the reasons for the project, and then some options we're looking at, and then we're going to have an opportunity for everybody to ask questions or make comments, whatever your interests are. We do have a sign-in roster, so if you could sign in, drop out your email, then we can provide updates as the project goes along if you're interested in that. Like I said, we will be recording, and so if you talk to your neighbors and they hear about it and didn't get to come tonight, they can always watch it on Westborough TV. So this will be what we cover as part of our overview, but the gist is I'm going to cover some of the reasons why we think we need to do something, and Fuss and O'Neill is going to describe some of the technical aspects and some of the alternatives that we're looking at considering. So this is a map on the right side of the screen here. I'm going to orient you and I'm going to talk you through the big picture of Jackstraw Brook. I recognize that many of you are familiar with the area, but for those that aren't, this is the downtown area. So your high school, West Main Street, South Street. There's a split here that take Hopkinton Road and Upton Road, I'm sure you're familiar with. You take Upton Road out and you follow it and you pass the reservoir, and there's a bunch of residential developments in here, and you've got Jackstraw Brook that runs along this route here, all the way out to Cedar Swamp, where it empties and eventually becomes the headwaters of the Sudbury River. So Cedar Swamp, important environmental area of the town. I mean, we're built either on it or closely to it in some cases, and that's where all of our water goes. So along this network of culverts here, and these bubbles here represent culverts, is Jackstraw Brook, and as it shows here is about 1,300 acres that contribute to that brook, and the word that's missing there is developed. So it's developed acres, so it's not, as you all know, forest or grass, it's roads and houses that all push off rainwater, and most of that rainwater ends up as stormwater in Jackstraw Brook. In about 2015-16 on Warren Street, a culvert was replaced and improved with some overflow. Today, like ongoing, is a culvert improvement project here on Bowman Street, and then the project we'll talk about tonight is comprised of this area here, which is the Upton, Morse, Hopkinton area. All of these, well, at least this culvert and these series of culverts we've been looking at for several years, as you can see that some of the dates on the slide. Lots of study that goes into what's contributing, what's the existing look like, where do we need to take this water, how are the culverts handling the water. There's other impacts such as the type of stream. In this case, Jackstraw Brook is a cold water fishery, which means the state has particular interest in the functionality and the environmental aspect of that stream. So there's lots of interests from various parties, and obviously there's people that live along the stream that have their own interests in terms of the impact of that stream on your properties. So our concern, and when I say I work for the Department of Public Works, and our focus is on maintaining town infrastructure. And so a key part of that is managing stormwater. And you can see on the right here, this little video, which is taken in front of the well house on Morse Street, once it gets to the road. So you're looking down towards Warren Street there. That's December of 2023. And that building there is a well for the town. You can see where it's flowing back there. That's where it comes out under Upton and heads down towards Hopkinton, follows Upton, crosses over, and gets to Hopkinton. So lots of infrastructure here. We have this well on Hopkinton Road. We have another well. As you can see, it provides about 15%. That's average, but it could be more depending on the condition of the reservoir and other places where we get water. So it's pretty important to the town that we protect that building, which inside of it is a pump. It's drawing water out of the ground, then it's sending it into our water system. So if floodwaters get to that building and inside that building, it can, one, contaminate our system potentially, and two, the water could obviously damage pumps and controls that are inside the building. So we want to protect it. There's also the roads themselves. Hopkinton Road and Upton Road are important avenues for the town, interconnecting connections to other towns, high-speed approaches for emergency services, potentially evacuation routes in crises. So important roads that we want to make sure are accessible and functional at all times. Of course, we want all roads in every neighborhood to be functional, but those are key avenues with high traffic volumes for the town. And something that I think should be, that we want to highlight is the fact that we're going to focus in specifically on the Upton, Morse, and Hopkinton area, but we have a responsibility to be looking at the town in total, and so these roads are important not just for nearby residents to get to and from their houses, but they're important for commerce and everything else that happens along those roads. So we need to keep them operating. And then in the roads themselves, we've got sewer and water and other utilities. We're not responsible for gas, but it's an important utility that exists in some of these roads, and we just want to make sure those are functional. So this is a picture from Leominster. It's the same year, 2023. We're showing this not to be dramatic, but to highlight that there are consequences of flooding. I think we're all familiar with that, and it's our responsibility as the Public Works that maintain these structures to not get to this point if we can avoid it. Now, that particular instance, there's probably not much of anything that's going to happen that's going to prevent that from occurring, but maybe there are some things that we can do in our town to mitigate the damage, right? Not necessarily prevent it. I mean, that's our goal, is to prevent it, but maybe we can't, but we can at least in some cases minimize, and that gets to stormwater management and how we manage the stormwater and how much flow we're creating and where it's going. So you can see in the picture, these are utilities that are now exposed, and that's, they can be compromised, and that's obviously not only an inconvenience if you lose water, but potentially dangerous if it's gas or if there's, contamination that happens. If you've got sewer and water running next to each other, which is pretty frequent in different pipes, of course, there's potential for cross-contamination. So these are all things, again, I'm not saying no one is going to suggest that this is going to happen tomorrow or anything like that. We're just saying from our perspective, we're thinking about how to protect the town and its assets from something like this. Another aspect that we should think about, that we think about, is the fact that I know that in this town where this picture was taken, and I suspect in most cases where you have an event that causes that kind of damage, that's not the only place in the town where it occurred. They had multiple locations where roads were washed out and damage occurred. So in our town, we have multiple locations that are at flood risk, and if that flooding is going to inconvenience us for a little bit and just shut down a road, well, we might be able to deal with that. But if it's going to have impact on services such as water and sewer and other utilities, then there's probably something more we should be paying attention to. And so if we have places around the town where this could occur, and let's just say we have 5, and we can do something at one of them to mitigate that risk, then the number of locations around the town where we have an impact is reduced, and so the potential for this type of event to happen is reduced. And so that's so I'm trying to just highlight that we look at the town in total and not just very specific locations, and those, you know, are unique by themselves. They're not. They're connected to other locations, and we have to prioritize where we do work, and that's what led us to this location because of the importance of the assets that are located nearby. There's other benefits, of course, to making improvements really anywhere with culverts, but particularly at this location. As I mentioned, we have a cold water fishery that has importance not just to Westborough, but to the state, and there's interest that the state has in maintaining that or improving where we can. Uh, so I mentioned the well and the location of the actual physical building, but that well that it's drawing, you know, the aquifer that we're drawing water from is underneath the ground in that area. And so separate from this project, we're doing work to identify how we can make sure our aquifers are sustainable over a long period of time. And so we're looking at ways to recharge the aquifers that we have in town. And one way is to, potentially in this location, is to encourage some more saturation. Instead of taking that water that's coming down Jackstraw Brook and racing towards Cedar Swamp and then going to the Sudbury River and going downstream to multiple other towns, can we do something to cause that water to stay a little bit longer in Westborough and some of it to infiltrate into the ground and support our aquifers? So we benefit from that water versus sending it somewhere else. So that's an aspect of this project that we're looking at, and it would be a benefit to the town in terms of our water supply, which obviously is important. And then related to operations and maintenance, we don't go out and replace culverts solely for this reason, but as you'll hear about in a few minutes, there's 11 culverts in this little network at Upton, Morse, and Hopkinton, and all of them have to be inspected, all of them periodically have to be cleaned. We have to make it said it needed to cool down. What's that? Yeah. How did you get rid of that box earlier?
It just disappeared after a while.
Apparently it needed to cool down, so hopefully that was just a momentary pause here. That's not our warning. I don't know what that thing is, so I'm trying to get it to go away. All right, apologize for that. So just to the operations and maintenance, just highlighting the fact that all of these culverts need maintenance, and we spend money to maintain them. And if there's opportunities to reduce the number of culverts we have, which is part of what this project will talk about, we benefit from that because it's time that we're gaining back that we're not having to maintain and spend money on culverts. So, so that's kind of the big picture look at the environment that we're talking about, and we're going to talk now with April about the specific location and the existing conditions.
Hi, everyone. My name is April Dorosky. I'm a wetland scientist and permitting specialist with Fuss & O'Neill, and have been on this project for a bit now. Just to give you a background on existing conditions before handing it over to my colleague. So as Chris was mentioning, this area has multiple culverts. If you count, it is 11 within just a half-mile radius or stretch of Jackstraw Brook. And that is a lot of infrastructure that is carrying the flow of Jackstraw Brook. But amongst that, along Morse Street, Hopkinton Road, Upton, there are also some low-lying roads, specifically Morse Street. And the previous video that was shown earlier was evidence of that, how the flow overtops Morse Street. Over time as well, Jackstraw Brook has been diverted and channelized and altered from its natural flow path. So you can see, I'll start at the bottom of the screen with the little clicker. This portion between culvert 1 and 3 is a very straightened portion dug out of Jackstraw Brook. And Jackstraw Brook has not only a main stem of the brook, but this is a diversion channel, another culvert, and this culvert 6 is also another overflow carrying Jackstraw Brook when water levels become high. So this area has been historically altered, and as Chris mentioned as well, this Jackstraw Brook is an important resource as it's a cold water fisheries resource. So it provides very good habitat for cold water aquatic species, think brook trout. And we don't have a lot of these in Massachusetts, so making sure that we preserve and promote the health of these waterways for us today and for the future is something to keep in mind. And this area is protected as an area of critical environmental concern as a white cedar swamp. Now, if you're familiar with the area, the wetlands around this specific area are not consistent with a white cedar swamp itself, but Jackstraw Brook will eventually flow into a white cedar swamp. So protecting this area is also critical to protecting the white cedar swamp downstream. To show you some photos of what these existing conditions look like, the straightened portion, this is showing you, you can see, looking up Upton Road, a highlighted portion, you can imagine that channel just being dug and naturally channelized to carry Jackstraw Brook. In addition to straightened and realigned areas, many of the culverts are undersized. They're too small to carry these rainfall events that we're seeing more and more of every day, and that can exacerbate flooding, with flooding getting backed up behind these culverts. And so when thinking about what this brook used to look like in the past, we wanted to take a survey of, in the 1800s or so, if we could find any evidence of what the flow looked like. So I thought this was pretty interesting, this topographic map from 1889. We have a zoomed in portion, and I was actually surprised you can still see Morse Street and Upton Road, the intersection, are shown there with Jackstraw Brook, shown in the blue, still quite sinuous, making turns. And in this topographic map, part that I want to kind of emphasize is this portion around Morse Street, where you can see Jackstraw Brook still interacts with many of the roads, Morse Street, Hopkinton, Upton Road, but this historic topographic map shows where it passes under Morse Street is a bit offset west from the current intersection. And that was interesting to think about in the past what the flow looked like, because we can also see evidence of where the water wants to flow during storm events. Now, this is another video taken in August 2023. Again, you can see the flooding, the flow is going over Morse Street. The water goes where it wants to go. It doesn't care if there's a road there. And thinking about this area being flooded behind Morse Street and what the historic aerials look like provided some good evidence for thinking about realigning the stream to its historic alignment and allowing the flow to be along a more naturalized flow path. And so in this picture over here, we have existing conditions, again in the background, with this lighter blue with the proposed new stream realignment to kind of match that historic area, and also where we can see the water is flowing in the high precipitation events. And that's a little background, so I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Laura.
Good evening, everyone. I am Lara Supp. I'm a senior resilience engineer at Fuss & O'Neill, and my role in this project has been to be a technical expert on the hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. And what that is hydrologic. You're thinking about the volume of stormwater that's falling from the sky, how much of it is there in any given rainstorm event. If we have 1 inch of rain, 3 inches of rain, what FEMA calls the 100-year storm, so maybe 8 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And then comparing that with the river geometry and how it flows through the river. So how it's interacting with the river itself and where the water surface elevation is going to be for any given storm. And why that's important is that we can compare existing conditions, so what there is today and how different storms affect your neighborhood today, and how it does with proposed conditions. So that way we can truth out exactly what's going to happen when we do any sort of changes to the river system and add culverts or widen things. So what we looked at are 4 different alternatives. We're going to walk you through them right now. I'll be honest, I've never seen a system more complex. It's actually exciting as an engineer to be able to work on something with so many culverts and think of some creative ways that are going to realign this in a safe, cost-effective, and ecologically friendly way. So our alternative 1 was replacing culverts in kind on Jackstraw Brook. No action on Morse Street. We also call this the do nothing option, right? So like, let's just say we leave it alone. What's going to happen? Well, culverts are going to fail over time. The roadways are going to need maintenance every time it overflows, and you may have roadways being shut down, emergency repairs. And with this option, there is no funding from resources because you're not being able to permit these new replacement culverts. They're not sized appropriately for today, and they're not sized appropriately for the future. So a part of this project that we were looking at is in Massachusetts, all over New England, and across the country, we're seeing climate conditions change. And here in Massachusetts, what that means for us is more increased rainfall events. So we're seeing more storm events, and they're much flashier. And when I say flashy, it means they happen very fast. So that storm event, the one that happened in Leominster, was 5 inches of rainfall in a couple hours. That is a very intense rainfall, and these culverts, this system isn't really designed for it. So it's thinking about, okay, this is not working today, what's it gonna look like in the future? So we're actually running those kind of predicted storm events too. So alternative 1, this do nothing, isn't really a viable alternative. But it's something that we need to do to think through different alternatives for permitting agencies. Alternative 2, so the next 3 are kind of thinking about realigning Jackstraw Brook. So that's what my colleague April talked about right here. So moving Jackstraw Brook from this, meandering back and forth, there's this main line, there's the alternative, the man-made channel. So realigning it before it crosses Upton and bringing it to its more historical location through here, through Morse Street, and then into this culvert number 5 is what we're calling it. With all 3 of these alternatives, we're also increasing the size of here of culvert 5 and culvert 9, where the main Jackstraw Brook goes. Those culvert sizes would meet Massachusetts stream crossing standards. So opening them up for aquatic passage, so fish species, and also terrestrial, so things that are, critters that are crawling on the ground and mammaliar activity. So alternative 2 is thinking about realigning Jackstraw Brook, and then it would be going underneath Morse Street. So we still have to cross Morse Street in alternatives 2 and 3. In alternative 2, we would add a culvert, probably about 20 feet wide, to align with stream crossing standards. We would add a culvert underneath Morse Street, and we would maintain the elevations of Morse Street. Morse Street overtops. We just saw 2 videos of different storm events where it's overtopping. So this also is not a great alternative because you're going to be seeing maintenance issues. The water is still going to be overtopping Morse Street in more frequent rainfall events. With this option, the water surface elevations are very similar to what they are today. Alternative 3 is thinking through, well, if we don't want Morse Street to flood, maybe we just raise it. That's an option. So we would realign Jackstraw Brook, we would add our culvert just like we did in number 2, but we would raise Morse Street. And if you think about that, it sounds good on paper, but what our modeling shows us and what makes sense is if this is our existing road and the water's coming along and it goes through the culvert and it starts to overtop, if we add a road up here now, the water comes along and it starts to overtop, but it doesn't overtop until it gets up to here. And so what that does is it backs up the water behind Morse Street. And so this location down in here and neighbors would see increased water surface elevations and would flood more frequently. That's not a good alternative either. So we moved on to alternative 4. Which is actually removing a portion of Morse Street. So this area right here is approximately 230 feet of Morse Street. So thinking about shutting down Morse Street right here, removing this small culvert that's carrying an intermittent stream so it can be naturalized, and then leaving a small portion by the wells so that we have an area for parking and turnarounds, any sort of maintenance needed. And then in this area, when we remove Morse Street, we also have the benefit, not just of, we have this entire area of Morse Street that is fill in the floodplain. And when we remove that, what happens is we start to see lowering water surface elevations of this entire area and the entire Jackstraw Brook because we're giving it back more volume. The water has somewhere new to go. And it's also reconnecting this wetland system to this wetland system, and it's able to really create some ecological restoration there. And so what's interesting to see over on the left is your FEMA firm map. So that's the flood insurance rate map. If you're living around here, I'm sure you're familiar at least with the terminology. This is what sets our flood insurance rates for the entire United States. So we have FEMA maps all across the United States, and these have been modeled. Just what I was talking about before, the hydraulic and hydrologic modeling. FEMA has done that, and they update them on a fairly regular basis. And so this is what, over on the left, your FEMA map looks like. And over on the right is the results of our floodplain study from our model that we did. The pink is the existing conditions, the boundary, and you'll notice, like if you look right here and around, it looks very similar to the FEMA map. And that's because we got the model, we procured the model from FEMA, and then we updated it with existing survey and what actually is going on. So that was our baseline information. And that sets you up for any sort of any sort of letter of map revisions later on after this project is done to actually lower water surface elevations on your FEMA insurance rate map. That'll be part of this project. And then in the pink, you can see what the existing boundary is, and then the purple is with the revised culvert at Upton Road, revised culvert at Hopkinton Road, and then removing Morse Street, what the new boundary would look like. So you can see it's tighter in, it's lowering the water surface elevation, and it is even over here, it's very hard to tell north of Hopkinton Road, but you can see just a little bit of pink on both sides. So even downstream, it's starting to kind of come together to follow kind of existing conditions. So thinking about order of magnitude costs, so alternative 4 is approximately $4.3 million. That is adding 2 new 20-foot culverts at Hopkinton Road, on Upton Road. It's removing Morse Street, and then removing, I'm actually going to go back really quick, removing culverts that are along Upton Road here, and removing culvert 8. And then it includes the channel realignment and restoration of that Morse Street wetland area. Alternatives 2 and 3 are almost $1 million more and then some. The difference in the prices there are you're adding infrastructure on Morse Street by doing that project. So you're adding a whole new culvert that's not in alternative 4, and you have to reconstruct the roadway no matter what when you're adding a new culvert. And then the difference in price is raising the road, whatever you need to raise it to. And then alternative 1, there really is no price on that because it's one of those things that if you're not going to be able to replace it in kind because it would never get past regulatory agencies. So it's kind of a hard one to put. However, there's a lot of maintenance associated with that, long-term maintenance. You could see it in some of the culverts that April showed. Here, you can see that this is a steel pipe that's inside of that goes underneath the road, and it's starting to separate from its head wall, and there's some pitting in it. So that's just one example, but there's 11 culverts that you have that are going to have increased maintenance. So with that, I'll pass it back to Chris.
So this is the end of the presentation. I'm going to wrap up with a few comments, and then we'll have the opportunity for anybody to ask questions or make comments. So where we are in the project now, we've done some initial permitting. We are in the design stage of the project, and the intent of this meeting is to get feedback and thoughts on, what you might think about the project and the options that we have before us. I suspect that if we weren't suggesting taking out the road, many of you might not be here because we replace culverts is kind of what we do, and so we go to the town and ask for funding at some point, and you say yes or no, and then we do it if we have the money. It's we explain the project, but it's generally pretty straightforward. There's an issue, there's a culvert, needs to be repaired, replaced, whatever, and we do it. In this case, kind of a unique option. And I say unique deliberately because in many cases where our culverts are located, there's in this particular location, the town owns the property around the road. So that creates an option because in many other cases, just about all cases I'm familiar with in Westborough at least, that doesn't exist. And so we would have to go to a homeowner or a business and ask them for their property to do what we're doing. And generally that's probably not gonna happen. In this case, it's an option, and we had to consider it because it's available to us. And so if you look at these numbers, the dollar amounts. I wouldn't necessarily get too fixated on the exact costs. These are estimates, and we're still early in the process. But our funding strategy is not determined yet. We're going to look for opportunities to use other people's money, grants, that sort of thing. Laura mentioned stream crossing standards and things like that. Those are important, not necessarily to everybody in this room, but it's important to us because that's what allows us to compete for that money. And so we have to meet the standards that are dictated by whoever's providing the money. $4 million or $6 million is a lot of money. So that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do a $6 million project at one time. We could potentially phase this over a year or 2 years or 3 years, and depending on how we can sequence. And there's logistics and things associated with that, but that's an option that we haven't fine-tuned yet. But that's a way to mitigate some of that cost over a period of time. One concern I know, and it's been raised, is if we were to pursue the route of taking the road or removing the road, then it kind of severs connectivity, obviously for vehicles, but also for people walking. So something that we will do based on some feedback and maybe some more tonight is look at an option. If we were to pursue the option of removing the road, how could we have some pedestrian connectivity that remains, so some sort of bridge that would allow people to get from one side to the other. There's things that still need to be figured out if that's an option we pursue. Obviously, there's an additional cost. In the scheme of this project, it's not going to be a crazy number, but more importantly, it has to be permitted. Not permitted like allowed, but permitted meaning it has to go through the permit process. And building something in a wetland is, there's challenges with that. So I can't say that that's a guarantee, but I'm saying we're committed to looking at that and doing that if it's possible, if we choose the option to remove the road. So that's something to consider. Going down my list to make sure I hit all the things we wanted to talk about. Funding, the pedestrian potential pathway. We're not sure what that would look like. I'm thinking it would probably be some sort of boardwalk type bridge, so to speak. I guess my final point, I'll leave and then we'll open it up, is we look at all of our culverts. So we have over 200. We have a report that inspected all of their culverts in town and ranked them. These are in the top 5. And as there's 11 culverts, but kind of the location is ranked in our top 5. And we evaluate them based on risk. So we look at the likelihood of failure and then the consequence of that failure. So how likely is it that something's going to happen to cause that culvert to fail, right? And if it fails, what's the consequence? So if it's a road kind of out in the middle of nowhere and it fails, the consequence might be an inconvenience, but it might not be catastrophic to the town. Whereas a road such as the two we talked about, Upton and Hopkinton, if those roads fail, the consequence is pretty significant for the town because those are evacuation routes, they're routes for emergency services and other things. So these culverts in particular rate very high in terms of their consequence of failure. The likelihood is moderate, and that's the case for most of our culverts because while they're dilapidated, old, and need to be replaced or fixed or something, they're not going to fall apart tomorrow, but we need to be thinking, and anticipating that they will need to be replaced. And if you remember the dates we showed, we started looking at this really in detail in Bowman in 2020 and Upton Morse in 2021. So it's 25, so we've been looking at it for 4 years, and that's just kind of understanding what's going on there and seeing what our options are. So it's a lengthy process just to get to where we are now, and we still have a few more years before we would actually be done with anything. So, so we need to be looking at these long-term and thinking about future and all those things, and that's all sequenced with other projects the town has to, and other priorities the town has for assets around town. So all of these things are just things that we're thinking about, so you know where we're coming from. When we looked at this option, and actually this option didn't come from the town, we kind of looked at the project originally as we're just going to replace some culverts and maybe make them bigger. And the state agency we were working with actually came back, because they were funding a lot of this work, so they came back with feedback and said, hey, did you consider this? And that's what led us to the avenue of maybe realigning the stream, and then that's what led us to the potential to remove the road. And when that first came up, we were in the room, and what are you talking about? There's no way we're gonna remove a road in the town, right? That road serves a purpose. And we may decide that purpose is important enough that we need to keep it. But it's our responsibility to come to the table with options. And you can see by the numbers that option is basically the least expensive, and it checks all the blocks in terms of things we're trying to do to mitigate the consequences of flooding. So I'm not here to convince anybody, I'm just here to propose recommendations, like concepts, alternatives. We're gonna get some feedback. At some point in the future, a decision will be made and we'll move out on it. But I feel like we have an obligation to propose to you, what appears to be the best. And this appears to be the best option from the perspective that we looked at it. And, we recognize there's impacts to, and I imagine most of you are residents who live nearby, there's impacts, right? There's inconvenience of removing a road. And we're sending you to other places to get onto Upton Road, that one of them at Warren Street and Upton Road and Mount Pleasant, that intersection there, a little wonky and probably separate from this project, needs to be looked at anyways, but we're now diverting some traffic to that location, and we recognize that, and so that there's consequences. But all of these things we have to look at. We're looking for your feedback, comments you have, and to kick it off, I'm going to invite Holden to be the first speaker. Holden is from the Division of Ecological Restoration, and it's not a plant. He's here as an interested attendee, but he also is from an organization that's given us a lot of the money to do with the work we've done to date on both this project and the project that's being constructed on Bowman Street. So with that, we'll open the floor. We'll kick off with Holden and then anybody else. We have a mic at the table. Turn this on, anybody can come up here. We also
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Holden Sparacino with the Division of Ecological Restoration. We're part of the Department of Fish and Game. We're a non-regulatory agency. Our mission is to restore wetlands, rivers, and watersheds for the benefit of people and the environment. As part of that, we provide technical assistance to towns that are interested in these types of projects, and also grant incentive funding for these types of projects as well. Jackstraw Brook specifically, as mentioned, is a cold water fishery resource and in a critical habitat area as well, with culverts that are undersized or failing or causing flood issues. We often see that both the number of species, the type of species, and the populations of each of those species are drastically reduced for each crossing they have to go through or can't go through. Terrestrial species like turtles often won't go through pipes, they'll go over the roadways, which causes issues because a lot of times they get hit by cars, that kind of thing. So as part of our grant, the town has actually been successful twice in our competitive grant. It's a statewide grant, And the first time was for field surveys, and the current grant is for permit level design of this stream reach. So I'm happy to answer any questions as far as the Massachusetts stream crossing standards. As I mentioned, our grant program does incentivize projects that meet the Massachusetts stream crossing standards to the maximum extent practicable. There's also other state organizations like MVP or the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant, as well as MassDOT just announced, I think it was $216 million that's being allocated to them to fund these types of projects, recognizing that they're causing flooding issues for towns. And they're also, we can build more resilient infrastructure and right-size some of these structures with the modern hydraulic design integrated into them. So thanks. I'm happy to answer any questions as far as that goes, but happy to be here. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Anybody? Yeah, okay. If you could just state your name and address.
Chris Kelly, 25A Warren. With the alternative 4, are you saying it's going to be like a swamp there, or it's going to be a moving stream? How is that going to look?
Actually a really good question. The stream would look very similar to like a kind of a low flow channel. If you think about what it looks like today on the southeast corner, actually I think what would be really helpful is putting up this map if anyone has questions. But what the stream looks like right here today, it's a pretty low flow stream. That's what it would look like under like normal everyday conditions when it's not raining outside. And then as rainstorms come through, you'll see this will become much more wet than it is today. And with larger storms, it would be wet, but then it would have a chance to slow down in that wetland system, and then, like Chris was talking about, recharge actually into the aquifer beneath it as the water starts to infiltrate into the ground.
So it's going to be standing water there, kind of?
It won't be standing water, and we'll have to see as it develops exactly what the water does in the wetland system. I don't want to promise that it'll be dry or that it'll be wet or that it'll be standing, but it is a wetland. It is coded as a wetland today.
So now if you take out culvert 8, where does that water go?
So that'll still remain. So the channel will remain. The culvert will go away, but you'll still have that intermittent stream. That's what it's called on the USGS maps, but it's an intermittent stream, so it's dry sometimes it's wet, so it's intermittent, and that'll remain as it is today.
Okay. Just one more question. How does this process look? Like, what happens after, like, how do we get to this actually happening?
So we're in a design phase now, and part of that design is being funded through the DER, and so we have that money is available till June of next year. So we expect by June of next year, we'll be pretty close to, or ready to basically go out to bid for a project. The funding is something we need to still pursue, but if we were to move forward with the option to remove the road, as I understand it now, that requires, it's a road, and it requires town meeting approval to remove it. So I don't know exactly the sequence yet, but potentially we would go to town meeting in March for some decisions on maybe the road, maybe funding. The design would then be complete by the summer. We would go out to bid, and then I suspect that probably 2027, we would start seeing some actual activity of the type, like construction type. Okay. And that could be, depending how it's phased, it could be, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years, something to that effect.
But it will be a vote. It'll be a town vote.
If we remove the road, that requires a town meeting vote. And if we need funding, that's going to be from the town, then that requires a town meeting vote.
If you build up the road, is that still a town vote, or that will just be done?
If we build up the road, and I just don't want to like be definitive, but if we build up the road and we have funding from some external source, then I don't see a trigger to go to town meeting.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I'm Joe Pucciarelli. I live at 23 Piccadilly Way. I'm here as a homeowner from 23 Piccadilly Way, and I'm also a trustee for Piccadilly Mill Open Space Trust, which is a homeowner association, and we are an abutter to some of these properties that are involved. I appreciate the fact that of the whole presentation, so thank you. But I reflect on the fact that we, as a town, ended up with 11 culverts in a well-developed, congested area. And the people who went before us built those 11 culverts because they believed that they had to. Now, I look at that, and what goes through my mind, given the fact that we are having more frequent and flash storms in the area, to what degree is the modeling you have done going to consider the larger map of how Jackstraw Brook affects all those properties behind that are not on this map for potential flooding for those homeowners? In other words,
I can actually jump in really quick.
Okay.
Yes, so the flood extents go from downstream by the Cedar Swamp,
Yep.
and then all the way through until it converges with existing conditions. And so it actually converges right very close to Culvert 1, maybe within 100 feet or 200 feet. And then we continued our modeling just to make sure that like we didn't get a bump or a decrease somewhere else off-site. And that is something that when this project goes through, FEMA will have to, after it's constructed, like FEMA will have to review it, the modeling, review the road and say, yes, we agree with this.
okay. You're understanding my question. My question is, Mother Nature has a way of surprising us.
It absolutely does.
Thank you.
Ralph Brennan, 28 Warren. Couple of main concerns is traffic. As you know, Warren Street's windy, people walk up and down it. You're just gonna create more traffic on Warren, and there isn't any good intersection to get out of Warren. So removing that road is detrimental to the people walking. My next question has to do with Culvert 6 on your map. When you did your modeling, were you able to determine what the choke point was that caused the flooding of Morse Street? It's got to be either 6, 5, or 7. Go ahead.
So we can't model for an existing, like any exact storm event of like the 2023. But we absolutely, the reason why we were seeing flooding in here is because of this channel realignment right here. So this culvert actually is very undersized for the stream that's coming through. And which is probably why back in 1950, this new alignment was built as kind of like an ancillary stream, and they couldn't get the water back over to here, so they built this triple barrel culvert, that's Culvert 3. And so in those flooding events, that's actually what we're seeing, is that this water is trying to come through. It can't, it goes here. This one's not big enough yet either, and so it starts to flow this way.
So the Culvert 3 is a double. That's a huge culvert. So if you increase the size of 3 and increase the size of 6, you wouldn't have to touch Morris Street. And what would the cost be of increasing 6, because you don't have any road work to do? It runs along the Upton Road. Easily done without a lot of, complications.
So there would be a big expense in culvert 3, which is, you'd have to replace culvert 3. We're looking about 20 feet wide is kind of the right size culvert for this stream. So culvert 3 would be pretty expensive because it's actually longer than the other ones. The problem with culvert 6 is that it's 250 feet. That is an extremely expensive culvert to be putting in. And then also, it would probably have to be wider than 20 feet if it was that long, because it is, there's also like openness ratios that you have to think about for aquatic species. So if you had 20 feet long, but it's 200 feet long, you wouldn't have sun for that 200 feet. That 200 feet, it's not ideal for the aquatic species.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Beth Hickman, 25 Warren. I was wondering if your surveys included, like looking at how much traffic currently is using Morse, that section of Morse Street that would be closed, just to try to consider like, well, how much extra then might be diverted through Warren that right now is going on to Morse and then Upton. Have any surveys looked at like
yeah.
the number of cars?
Yeah, we did just a basic vehicle count over a period of days. It's obviously varies, but the average going both directions is about 250 to 300 a day. So just to compare that, say, to South Street at Baxter, so you're following Upton Road up that way, get to the intersection, head left. So South Street, 135, pretty active. That average is about 5,000 a day. So just to give you a kind of a idea of the numbers we're talking about.
And then if there is like push towards like a pedestrian walk, so let's say, okay, we close Morse Street, we're gonna push forward with a pedestrian walkway. What's the process for looking at that? Like, what kind of resources does Westborough have to support a pedestrian walkway through that area?
So we would just incorporate that into the project as it is now, and it would be added as a design component, and we would give direction to the designers to figure out how to do it, basically. And so that just, so it obviously adds costs, as we mentioned, and then it triggers some permitting requirements that we'd have to work through.
And that discussion would take place at the whatever town hall meeting that would talk about closing it? Or is it like you would talk about that before?
Well, we would, in my mind, we haven't like worked out the details yet, but in my mind, if we went to town meeting, whenever that is, with a recommendation to remove the road, we would give some sort of presentation similar to tonight and describe to everybody what's going on. And by the time we got to that point, we would have some concept, if not a design, for how that crossing would work, and that cost would be in what we're asking for, so it would be rolled into it. I don't see it as like a subsequent thing, I see it as just part of the project.
I'm just going to follow up on the traffic one. We have a modeler here. So Steve Aronson, 12 Morse Street. It feels like, I know you say these numbers are small, but modeling's not linear. Should we do a traffic study to know what the impact of Morse is? You're pushing people into some maybe potentially contentious, I'm not saying it would be bad, but is it something that should be a part of this project? I know you're not a traffic modeler, but it's close to what you do. So is that something that would make sense before you present this to say, this is what it's going to do to these interchanges, here's what the impact's going to be?
Yeah, we would definitely, by the time we would be presenting this more formal, like for money or for a decision, we would have more definitive data. If the concerns come down to traffic and I don't know what else, I don't know of any other concerns besides the traffic outside of the pedestrian crossing. So we don't have that data now. We're not budgeted right now to do a traffic study. So I don't know what that means cost-wise or timeline-wise, but we didn't want to invest in that until we kind of got a
Sense of whether people would
sense
accept
of
this or
what
not. Yeah, I understand.
issues might be out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I think you'd like to know what, trip impact would be and time. That, I mean, that's the kind of traffic study I think you'd want to look at
Yeah.
is somebody going to the dump on a Saturday or something else. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eric Isaacson, One Morse. I have a couple questions regarding the proposed options here. You mentioned town vote if we were to eliminate the road. Are these options voted on, or how do we come to, how do we decide on what we're moving forward with?
We would make a recommendation. The DPW would make a recommendation.
We as in the deep,
We, as in me, the DPW, would come to town meeting and make a recommendation with a course of action. And we would probably, I suspect that we would need a decision on the road removal first. And if that option moved forward, then we would then ask for money. If it didn't move forward, then we would not do it.
okay. Is option 3 actually being considered? During the presentation, you mentioned if you raise the road, it's gonna promote localized flooding, so the houses that are, in that surrounding area are probably gonna be impacted negatively. It was mentioned in the meeting. Is that an option?
Laura can maybe speak to some technical aspect of that, but I can't see us proposing something that's going to have a negative, we're not gonna propose something that's gonna have a negative impact on a butter, because I don't think it would be successful, right? So no, I don't know that we would do something that's gonna, but I don't know that we've specifically modeled that. I think we're just making some assumptions right now on if you raise the road, it's probably, the road's there now, it kind of acts like a dam. If you raise it higher, you're just making a higher dam. So we're making an assumption that that's a case, I think, right?
We've actually done some preliminary modeling on that, very conceptual level, and we did find that it had increases. And because of that, exactly like what Chris said, that on to the next alternative. That's not a viable option. We're not going to be recommending something where we're seeing increases or negative impacts to abutters.
So we just said it.
Can I just add to that? So, but we still have to put it out there for everybody to understand that we looked at. Like option 1 is, I don't think that's, we could do nothing, and if that's ultimately what is decided, then that's what'll happen. But as Laura said, it's not working right now. There's evidence of that, and we expect that in the coming years, and I'm talking, not 2 to 3 years, I'm talking decades, because these are decades-long projects that we need to be thinking about, matched with many other projects around the town that are occurring over a long period of time. So we have to put it all out on the table and make people aware. And while there could be some refinements, like was asked before, can you just work with this culvert and that? Those are kind of tweaks to the bigger options we have, right? We have an existing, we have 3 alternatives: raise the road, lower the road, or put the culvert in and then take out the road. There's some tweaks that could probably be done to some of those, but in general, those are the options we have. And we have to put them all out there. But are we gonna recommend do nothing? I'm not, because I don't wanna deal with a well that doesn't work and we lose water to the town. Are we gonna recommend an alternative that impacts an abutter? No, I don't think that makes sense either. So, but we have to make sure that we looked at those things.
I'm also curious, if you redirect the water and you're going into the woods excavating, what's the impact? What's that going to look like to the rest of us? Is it going to get cleared out? Is it just temporarily to get machinery in there, or is it going to be looking the same once it's done? Or
You can comment, but in general, like the construction will be machinery and there's going to be things removed. But the intent, I believe, and I'm not a wetland scientist, so I don't know what trees grow in the water and all that sort of thing, but the intent would be to restore it to a condition that it's a, ecologically enhancing the environment, and it's not just like a open field of dead trees kind of thing, right? You can say it better than I did, but.
Maybe. The intent is to have as minimal impact as possible. In fact, we actually, you can see here that we have the southwest portion from the roadway intersection. It's following the tree line. It's kind of hard to tell with the aerial map because it's in the winter. So this is the patch of trees. And so we're actually having it follow the tree line. There's going to be some grading alongside, but we're trying to keep it as minimal impact as possible. And also following that historical path that it used to take. And then through here, we field walked it. We did some sediment probing to see where the existing channel would have been 100 years ago. And then we looked at the trees around it while we flagged it and used GIS surveys to try to avoid as many trees as possible.
Thank you.
Hi, Gail Erickson, 31 Warren Street. Can you go back to the financial slide? If you go with alternative 4, you're going to need, you didn't take into consideration in this slide the renovations that you're going to need for a pedestrian walkway. And also, Warren Street is extremely windy. It's dangerous for the kids. You're going to need to put sidewalks in, I would hope. There would be sidewalks put in if that goes through. So wouldn't that bring the cost up another $1 million?
So I don't know, but there's not any intent to do, as part of this project, pedestrian improvements outside of the immediate project, so that whatever crossing there might be, if we were to move the road, that would be incorporated, but there's no plan to put sidewalks on Warren Street.
Well, if there's 250 to 300 cars going down Warren Street, they're going to need some sort of safety precautions.
But those cars are already on Warren Street today, so.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not dismissing the concern. There's no plan right now that would involve adding sidewalks on any of the roads surrounding the project. And what the intent of this meeting is to get feedback such as yours to understand concerns, and then figure out what we think makes sense based on feedback we've received. But at the end of the day, I suspect, just like with all projects we do, there's always going to be impacts to somebody. And what we have to do is figure out, what option makes the most sense financially and environmentally, not just like the environment, but the neighborhood-wise, and what's feasible, and figure it out.
And did I hear you say you're going to have to take a lot of trees down? Will you have to take all the trees that are up there on Morse Street?
Any trees that Laura was talking about were trees that might exist along this realigned route that would impinge on the stream location. And so what she was referring to was how we were trying to figure out how to navigate around those trees with minimal trees being taken out. That's the intent.
Okay, good, because we have a lot of turkeys and a lot of wildlife that live there. All right, thank you.
Mary Aronson, 12 Morse. You showed video of the flooding. there were 2 dates, August of '23 and December of '23. Do you have any idea over the past, let's just say 10 years, how many more incidents like that occurred? Because I live there, and I don't even remember that flooding, let alone any other flooding. So do you have any idea of how much flooding is actually happening, the frequency?
I don't think we have anything recorded that says what's happened in the last 10 years beyond just anything that might be documented somewhere.
So you have 2 events that you had the video for. And yeah, it was flooding over Moore Street. Totally agree with that. Saw the video, can buy that. I recognize the area. But if it's not happening 30 times a year, is it that much of a problem? That's my question, but that's not the end of it.
But would you like, I mean, I can respond.
I mean, well, no, I want you to consider this.
Yeah, okay.
How much of a problem is this? When I live there, and I don't even remember those 2 floodings, let alone for the past 25 years, do I remember any other flooding?
Right. But in that 25 years, there's been substantial development along the Jackstraw Brook that's increased the impervious area that's contributing to the brook. And so the conditions have changed over 25 years.
Well, that's why I asked for 10. I said 10 years.
And what we expect is that in the next 25 years, the conditions are continuing to change, and the conditions that are changing are the frequency and intensity of the storms. I'm not making that up.
I totally agree with that. I'm just asking you, other than those 2 events, what have you seen in the past 10 years that prompted this like very major project to be considered? That's all. You don't have to answer it right now.
But for us,
I just want you to consider it.
Responsible for this infrastructure, we have a well there that it only takes once to impact that well, and then we're out of commission in terms of serving water.
Okay, so speaking of the well, so what happens if we do this and then the pump station or the well or whatever it is that you're calling it, if flooding is still a problem there, then what do we do?
Well, we're trying to mitigate. I'm not
We're trying to mitigate
I'm
that.
not
That's the
proposing that we're going
point.
to
Okay.
stop anything.
I'm just worried
proposing mitigation.
that pump station is very, very close to where you're redirecting this stream. And I know it's raised a little bit. It's not raised that much.
Agree, yes.
So, and my last question is, and I know I'm bringing up old wounds, and I don't know if the people on Morse Street, or excuse me, on Warren Street, whose house was flooded numerous times, and this is probably back 15 years ago, they did a major, I'm going to call it a culvert, because I think that's what it is, work on Warren up towards Bertus Adams.
Yep.
After that development went in, and those poor people, every time I went to town meeting and saw them with their flooded house, I just had so much feelings for them. But the first thing that they did didn't work. The second thing that they did didn't work. And finally, those homeowners finally got relief from a third project that was major and cost a lot of money. So I am bringing up old wounds because, like somebody just said, Mother Nature is unpredictable. And we're doing all these studies and we're doing all the right things. I totally can buy that. But I just wanted to raise some concerns.
Hi. I'm Jim Cavaretta. I'm at 52 Warren Street. And watching what's going on here, it seems to me that the most important consideration is, or should be, enlarging culverts under Upton Road and Hopkinton Road to carry more of the water that may be backing up next to Moore Street there. And it is an unfortunate situation when that happens. It's not a frequent problem. I have been in my home throughout the time that we were having very bad repeated flooding incidents. I had the good fortune of being just high enough in elevation on one side of the Jackstraw Brook that I did not get impacted, but we had a culvert that Ms. Erickson was referring to that could not carry the volume of water that was coming down the hillside. A lot of the increased water in the brook was attributed to developments upstream as far as Toll Brothers development on Ruggles Street. And where at one time that was all open land and could absorb the water, it was running off now and ending up in the brook. And for those that were not here at that time, what would happen in my neighborhood is that the culvert, not being able to handle all of the volume of water coming down, would back up into the pasture owned by Bert Adams at that time. And it would flood, get as deep as 3 or 4 feet, ultimately spill into the roadway and go downhill, which from where I live is toward Morse Street. My 3 neighbors just north of me had repeated flooding incidents. Their basements would be flooded. The water would go over the road and build up in their basements and drive-in garages. One of my neighbors lost 2 cars in one incident because it deposited about 3 or 4 feet in his garage overnight. Luckily, the town was very responsive and tried repeatedly to get the situation rectified. And the solution was to increase the carrying capacity of the culvert that went under Warren Street. The original culvert there was retained, and a second one was built that carried even more water. And luckily, in this situation, we're not affecting residents with their personal property. Of course, the pump station is a big consideration. But it seems to me, and watching that video of that little field that flooded and went over the road, that does not compare in intensity to what we were dealing with. And it seems in my uneducated engineering sense that I would think that larger culvert that could carry more water under Upton Road and then down and across the field toward the swamp would be a solution that would avoid having to take the extreme measure of digging up a road. And again, it's all my opinion. I'm not an engineer. But again, sharing my experience with you, it would seem to me that digging up the road would not give you enough absorption of water in that area to justify the expense.
Thank you.
Alan Brule, 18 Morse Street. First, I want to say hello to all my Warren Street neighbors who I see walking daily onto Morse Street, and because I won't be seeing you much anymore if this goes as planned, and it's one of my major concerns. And I don't want to say that I've heard before when I've sat at town meetings, and I've been in my home on Morse Street for 36 years. Well, we'll look at that pedestrian way or a place where we could have bicycles that could ride there, so it wouldn't be completely shut off from the, going up to Piccadilly, which has sidewalks where people enjoy walking, and we actually have cut-throughs through the woods there because it was a well-designed development. And then they come down Morse Street, we get to say hi to each other. It's a very community thing that we're doing there. And I don't know anyone's names necessarily, but I do say hi to everybody every day because I'm out there, hanging out, mowing my lawn and stuff. And I'm not real confident if this went to town meeting with no plan for pedestrian and bicycles, that I'll get up there and I'll ask to vote against it. Because cutting off that street from that whole area of town, first of all, kids ride their bikes to school. They ride their bikes to the high school because they don't want to go out to Hopkinton Road. So you're going to put, if this goes through with no pedestrian and bicycle pathway, you're going to put kids coming out of Moore Street and Piccadilly who ride their bikes going down Upton Road to that crazy intersection at Upton Road and Hopkinton Road, and you're going to ask them to cross that and then go to the high school on their bikes, which is really dangerous because a lot of them go through and cut through and then weasel their way around, and come into the high school that way. So there's a lot of, there may be, I'm amazed at the car traffic, first of all. That number was astounding to me, going down that little stretch of Warren Street. But the bicycle traffic and the pedestrian traffic's not being counted. And I think that's a major blow to the neighborhood. I really do. Now, that being said, ecologically, I understand creating a wetland. I understand putting Jackstraw back to the way it should have been done. It should never have been maybe done with all these culverts and everything. But I don't know how that's actually protecting the pump house. I don't know if there's been a study that said, that you've done, that said this is going to make that pump house safer. And I'm worried that across the street from the pump house, this is a precursor to putting a big storage facility of chemicals for the pump house, which already got voted down at town meeting last time. So I'm concerned about those two things being tied together here, and we say, okay, we get this, now we're going to go for that. And I'm concerned about Hennessy Field flooding, which is being used a lot. So those are my concerns, and I don't know if you want to address them or if you can address them now, but I will be very vocal. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. I can address a couple of them. So as I mentioned earlier, the option for removal of Morse Street, if that moves forward, we already as we indicated, we would incorporate some sort of pedestrian connection, but that's not entirely up to us. That has to be permitted, and so I can't guarantee you that's going to be successful. But that's what we're committed to, and which we've discussed, is figuring out what that'd be. And like I said, it's some sort of boardwalk. I don't know what it is, but it's something to connect through that, connect over that stream. Regarding the well, I mean, we showed the modeling, and I'm certainly not going to guarantee anybody anything about the weather or about water and where it's going to go. But as I mentioned, for me, I say me because there's responsibilities associated with my position to manage the water supply and how we deliver water to the town, which is the most critical thing we do. And that's an important building. And so we need to do something to mitigate, if not completely eliminate, the threat to that building. So the analysis that's been done to date has led us to these alternatives that indicate there will be some mitigation by creating more volume in this open space on either side of the road, and if the roads are moved in between, that volume kind of creates a bigger bathtub, so to speak, for the water to get to, and then get out, to Cedar Swamp. But right now, that's not happening, or it's not happening the way we'd like to see it happen. So in terms of the building across the street, that was a proposal. It was disapproved, like the zoning associated with that was denied or voted down at town meeting, and that was, like you said, a couple years ago. So we've already moved on from that, and we have the buildings we have. So Hopkinton and Morse, and so we have what we have. So we need to protect as best as possible those two buildings because of what they do for the town.
Hi, I'm Carrie Goslin, 8 Morse. That's our house right there. Not to reiterate this, but I just wanted to mention when we talk about the importance of the pedestrian access and safe transit for kids, bikers, dog walkers to downtown. When we bought our house, we actually came and I routed out how we could safely get to sidewalks to get to downtown. And it's by going across and going over Warren and then getting to that slightly better area to cross the street where the sidewalk is, or the crosswalk, and then that leads to sidewalks, which connects to downtown. So I feel like that's a huge issue, and all the neighbors I've talked to, many of whom are here, but many of whom are not, that's the main concern. I was just curious, I remember when we talked about some similar issues at town meeting a couple years ago, there was the talk of that well or pump house, whatever we're calling it, on the northwest corner needing to be replaced. Is there plans to do that with this? Or I guess I'm a little confused how each of the proposals would impact that well building, and if there's plans to move it, renovate it, or if that's separate from this project.
It's a separate project, but there is a plan in the design phase now to renovate that building. And part of that is within the footprint we have, we can't change the footprint of the building, but there's intent with that project. So more than you asked, but the trigger for the renovation of the building is there are chemicals that exist in those buildings now, and they need secondary containment. That's a regulatory requirement. We need to fix that. And so the renovation is going to help us address that, and where possible, add protection against flooding. So again, I'm not guaranteeing that well's never gonna be disabled because of flooding, but they're two different projects, but they're complementary. So we reduce, where possible, the amount of water, the potential for water to get to the building through some option, one of these four or some other thing. And we renovate the building and the controls inside, because that has to be done anyways, and we do some things to harden the infrastructure of the building so that if water does approach the building, potentially we can keep some of it out. So it's happening separately, but they're
kind of
related.
Overlapping.
Yeah.
And just, so that would be in the existing location, not in a new location?
No, yes, it's in the existing location.
Existing location, okay. And then I just had one more quick point, which was if we do a formal traffic analysis or gain more data, I just wanted to make sure it was during the school year, because I'm guessing the traffic would be quite different if it was summer or school.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well done. Dave Venzel, 8 Morse Street. I'll just reiterate, that was my wife, about the kids. We were at Mill Pond the other day, and they were kind of harping on the idea of children being independent, right? Getting their independence by doing things that are a little bit outside their comfort zone. And I think the kids of our neighborhood going and walking to town, going to the library, going to Cha-Cha and Beans, whatever, with their friends is an important part of growing up. And I think it's much more likely that I would allow them to do something like that if Warren Street were open, as opposed to walking down, the main streets to that terrible intersection. That's kind of beside the point. So you're talking about removing Morse Street and then letting the water flow as it may, right? And hopefully it goes back to the historic norm of where Jackstraw Brook was. And you also said that water kind of flows where it wants to flow. So by removing a barrier there and removing the culverts, I think 3 and 4 and 8, which seem to be actively routing water around the well house. By removing all those and then allowing that water to kind of stream where it may, in 30, 40, 50 years, are you saying that the erosion is not going to get close to that well house?
I will take a stab and then she will clarify. But so the existing, maybe that was the intent of the existing to route.
It's just
around.
what it looks like, you know?
It does, and it makes, maybe that's what it was intended to do, but it's not working. So it needs to be corrected in some form or fashion. If the stream is realigned, it's not just opening the field and letting it go, it's creating a channel, which you can speak more to, but we would create I'm not using the right terms probably, but cut a stream, basically. It's not just gonna flow across like level ground and go where it wants, it's gonna have a channel that's created that at times it would spill over that channel, but during kind of routine, just rain events, et cetera, it would just follow the channel and go its way.
That's like the idea, right?
Yes.
But again, modeling is modeling. How much extra, sort of, compared to what it is now, how much extra wetlands do you expect for that water to be absorbed into the wellhead that you're talking about? So, like how much extra gallonage per year or whatever do you expect to be in the well?
I don't know if we have any sort
No
of,
idea.
We don't have any sort of number.
Okay.
It's a secondary benefit that we know exists. It's not something I don't know that we could quantify it per se, but because it's based on the volume of rain and how frequent and all that sort of thing. But but we know there is some benefit to it, and we're looking for any benefit we can get anywhere in the town where we have wells.
Okay. How much would the insect load of the area increase based on the increased wetlands? So for those people on Warren Street and down on Morse Street, obviously, you know, triple E, all those insect-borne viruses becoming more prevalent, you're going to increase the wetland area there, which is, you know, theoretically fantastic. But in actual, like, fact, those people live around the areas are going to be affected by that. How do you predict that to be, you know?
I don't know that we have an answer. I think we say wetland because it is a wetland, but the intent is not to hold water there. Like, we need to get the water out. That's the intent.
Well, yeah, but you said it was going to be a more slowly flowing sort of, I don't want to use the word stagnant, because stagnant is still, but a slowly flowing, like, sort of stream of water, which increases the likelihood of pooling, insect accretion.
So that's, so when we're talking about slowing down the water, we're really talking about a flood event. And so this area is already seeing water during very large flood events. And then, like Chris was saying, we are going to be creating a channel. So we're not completely just letting the water go where it wants to go, but we're giving it a pilot channel, so somewhere to start. That's already there.
Okay,
on
so
the east side of Upton.
Sorry, can I just ask while it's in my head? So you're doing something, but once the road is eliminated, right? It's going to be completely wetlands, and it's going to be out of the hands. It's going to be basically like wherever it goes at that point, because in order to change anything at that point, you're going to have to go through environmental protection or whatever else. So whatever happens over there is going to happen. So your best laid plans are, I'm going to put this here, but if it flows here, it's fine. If it flows here, it's fine, right? So if it does end up flowing closer to the well house, that's just where it's going to have to flow, right?
We can put in, we can think about the design and put in mitigative measures. We have done other projects like where we're designing this, and there's points for protecting public infrastructure like this, where you could bury some boulders or rocks, cobble in like below the channel, so that if the water was to meander that way, you could do that. a lot of times it would stop it from carrying on from the erosive properties. That's not something we'd want to do right away. That's something that would be a mitigative measure if that happens 10 to 15 years from now.
I think that's all I can think of right now. Doug?
Hi, Doug Brown, 10 Morse Street and 24 Hopkinton Road. I was wondering if you guys have looked at where the water goes across Hopkinton Road through my parents' property and how that stream is all, has never been cleaned out by the town, and it backs up into the swamp. That's what causes it to back up, all the beaver dams and so forth. And it seems like the channel's very narrow there. I don't see a lot of cold water fish swimming up there. So I was wondering if you guys have looked at that.
We've definitely looked at it from a maintenance
You know,
perspective.
I've had calls from the town saying, hey, is it okay to use your property to go clean the brook out? And then they never end up doing it. So
yeah.
seems like that's causing it to back up.
It's certainly connected to the what's happening with the water. It's not.
Putting a big culvert there is not going to help much because it's just going to back up with where it channels and goes around through our property.
So the aspect you're talking about and what's happening in Cedar Swamp is a very good question. It's not part of this project specifically, but it is a.
Seems like it should be.
It is a project that's being, or a issue that's being looked at by the town.
Okay. And as far as taking out Morse Street, it doesn't seem like you're going to create that much more volume. If you remove, you're just going to take out the road, you're not going to cut the dirt out. So I don't know how it's going to increase the volume. I agree it's a good idea to put a culvert in, but it seems like it'd be best just put a new culvert across Morse Street, leave all the other ones open, and let the water do what it's been doing and help it from not flooding Morse Street. Seems crazy to take Morse Street out and create more traffic on Warren Street where you're not going to do any more improvements.
The removal of Morse Street would include removing.
Where are you going to put the culvert then? Why put a culvert if you're going to remove the dirt? If you're trying to create volume by removing the road, why do you need a culvert?
Well, it would be one or the other.
Well, it says there, remove portion of Morse Street, and you show a new culvert in there, right? There won't be a culvert in there if you remove Morse Street?
Correct. Either Morse Street is removed and there's nothing
Right,
there.
so you're not going to create that much
or it's a
volume
culvert.
just by taking out Morse Street. Seems like you're better off just put a culvert in, let people live the way they've been living, and make it safe for traffic. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks.
Ralph again, 28. The culvert that you plan on replacing, culvert 5, in your drawing here, if you were to go with alternative 2, would the culvert underneath Morris Street be the same size? So if it's the same size, and culvert 5, I'm going to assume is elevated at least 1 or 2 feet probably below Morris Street, would that be accurate, or do you?
If there was a culvert underneath Moore Street, it would not be as tall in alternative 2 as the culvert replacements on culvert 5 and culvert 9. It would be as wide though, because we would try to be meeting stream crosser standards as much as possible by giving it the width, but because Moore Street is so low under existing conditions, it wouldn't be as tall.
Right. My point being, why would we think it would overflow Morris Street if it's going to be the same size as number 5? If you think number 5 is going to handle the flow, wouldn't the one under Morris Street handle the flow? And if at town meeting, we say, no, you can't do Morris Street, now alternative 2 is your go-to plan. And if that's the case, everybody, let's just vote it out, and then we don't have to worry about it, and they have to do number 2, and you engineer the proper culverts to continue Jackstraw Brook. You make your you do your thing, bring it around, and it's a win-win and everybody's safe.
We've talked about a town meeting with a big town vote, and you have said you would make a recommendation. Are you required to make a recommendation? Or you can just go about doing what you're doing with all of these unknowns and all of our concerns, would they be dismissed? Or would it definitely go to a town meeting?
Well, for the removal of the road, that's a specific question just by itself. I mean, we would give some context. If we recommended removing the road as part of this project, we would explain the project. But it's a specific vote to discontinue a road. And so there's a specific vote that's required to authorize the removal of road. So that's a decision by itself. And then I would assume that if in the presentation of that proposal, it was approved to remove the road, then a subsequent request, probably the next article on the warrant, would be to ask for money if we needed the money to do the project. But we wouldn't ask for the money if the road didn't get the approval to be removed, because we obviously wouldn't be able to do the project. Does that answer your question?
I guess, kind of, yeah, okay. I mean, as long as we have kept, abreast of the situation. Yeah.
I've got a question as well. Dale Call, 26 Lawrence Street. Culvert 8 is marked as removable. Has anyone done a study on how much water comes out of the ground right here? This is in Eric's backyard and flows directly through my backyard. And there's a lot of water that comes down through there and goes through my backyard. If that culvert's removed, that's going to enter in that, quote, pooling area that you guys call it. That is low area, and I can't see where that's not going to make that whole area swampy. Someone needs to go out there in the spring and look at that and do an analysis on it. A lot of water, it's not runoff water, it's a spring right there. So it needs to be looked at, I think.
Did you look at a bridge? We're talking about the pedestrian walkway, and if we need to have it wide, could you just bridge the road?
I don't know that we talked about a bridge specifically. It would be essentially what the culvert option would be. Some of this too, and I don't know specifically about what you just suggested, but we have to go with this, take an approach that's fiscally responsible as well. And so we have to, there's probably other things we could do that would, solve all of these problems, but it would be unaffordable. I can't think of what that would be, but, we've got to come to the table with something that we think we could afford to do and actually get funded. Any other comments?
Just last one. And I think it's been said, but I just want to reiterate it. The pedestrian access is not part of alternative 4. And like we said, that's going to run a mill, a cool mill here. So alternative 3, 2, and 4 are now in the same price tag.
You're suggesting that the pedestrian crossing could cost $1 million, is that what you just said?
I think it might be up there pretty high. Doug?
How long is it going to take years for a bridge?
Lots of them, every bit. You have to
Any other comments? All right, well, I found this helpful, appreciate everybody's feedback. We took notes. We'll take your feedback and digest it and look at how we can incorporate it into the project. You have our contact info, we have your contact info. We're happy to answer more questions. So, thank you for coming.
If anyone walked in late, could you please sign in? The signage over on the table.